Thanks for listening to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. You can contact the show at twitter.com/DW Groovecast and through Facebook at facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Good evening.
I am warning you right now, if you touch my drums, I will stab you in the neck with a knife.
Ain't a bucket. Ain't a bucket.
Mom!
Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
Everything get straightened out?
No, we had a problem. I mean, we tried to do everything we could.
What do you mean?
Well, you know what I mean.
Little trouble there. You're rushing.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Yeah!
Man, these third mic shows, I'm getting to really like these.
Because it's less of me.
It's less of both of us, man. And plus, we got the master sitting a foot away from us.
I love this, man. I've seen this young fella a whole bunch lately. And I love
I've seen your
every
mug a
second
lot
of
too,
it.
buddy.
I know. I'm
I've
sorry.
enjoyed it. Hate to admit it.
Yeah. Painful. That's just the medication he's taking talking.
I saw him open up that pill box, man, when he started drinking his coffee.
Us jaded old bucks.
Well, without any further ado, let's tell our listening audience who we have sitting next to us today. It's with our great pleasure that we want to welcome back to the Groovecast for his first third mic appearance, the one and only Scott Meeder. Brother, it's great to have you back here, man.
Great to be here, guys.
Shoot, man, we got a topic today that's we're going to lob that softball up there and let you knock that sucker out of the park, man.
Love it. We had a little warm-up the other night hearing him play.
Just a little bit.
Just slay Gaucho, which is, in my opinion, one of the most difficult tunes to play right. Man, it was a pleasure.
Oh, it was fun. I mean, John, I was like, when I first heard that song, I was, man, I don't know, dude. That's a hard one to but man, I accepted the challenge because I loved it. I mean,
it was amazing. But what pisses me off about that was like 20 years of living in your shadow. I'm like, I'm gonna put it to him. And of course he comes in and just burns it to the ground. I loved it, man. It was awesome.
Do you remember what I said to you? Because you and I were standing right back there, right behind the drums. Do you remember? Do you remember what I said to you?
I don't remember anything except that I know Scott played that song really well, and that's about the only thing I remember about the whole night. It was such a blur for me.
First tune that he played was Lowdown.
Right.
At 186 beats a minute.
Hey, well, listen, I want to bring
only a man can make that feel good.
I want to bring some clarification on that. That you didn't play that song nearly as fast as you thought you did.
Wow. I listened back or watched one of those videos. I'm like, okay, off.
Well, but did you take a minute and because we talked a little bit about just the entire night, okay? But did you take a minute though and compare it to the original?
The original maybe like 2 or 3 minutes in.
Well, let me just say this: I'm holding up 4 fingers.
Yes, sir.
And me being the psychopath that I am, I grabbed a metronome, and the Scott Meeder tempo was 4 BPM faster.
How about that?
That's all that it was.
That's a lot, dude.
Well,
that's a lot at 116.
Yeah. So,
but you have everybody on stage going, "Oh my God!" for 3.5 minutes. You're doing something right.
Well, of course, I will say this though: the live version on YouTube with Boss Skaggs, it was like 8 faster. Right. So really? I do have that in my back pocket. So
yes,
I'll take that.
Well, let me tell you what I said to him that he doesn't remember because he was buzzing so high that night on live. Was that you got a solid 30 seconds into that tune. And I just looked over at John and I said 2 things. First thing I said, Scott Meeder is putting this band on his back, man, and just making it happen, just elevating the entire thing. And then the second thing I said to John, just maybe like a couple minutes into it, is I'm one of these guys that not for any type of critical thing, but I look at people's hands and I look at technique because I do so much teaching. And I just looked at John and I said, don't ever let Scott Meeder tell you he doesn't have some hands. Because, man, your technique, your hands, man, were just tremendous, man. Just
thank
beautiful.
you.
They were. They just looked great, man.
That's awesome. Thank you, buddy. I mean, I just do what I do, man. Just get up there and groove, you know.
See, there's the old, I don't even know how I got here
deflection,
today.
Total deflection.
I've only been doing it for a few years. Hopefully I'll improve.
Yeah. Because, man, you're
that means the world, buddy.
Well,
thank you, man.
And this is all kind of
I'm going to have to take his word for it, but
this is one of these things that's kind of coming together to what makes this topic that we're going to talk about today what it is, is that to be able to get certain sounds and to be able to play a certain way, you've got to have enough stuff in your hands. You've got to have enough technique, and you've got to have enough just overall chops in your hands. Or I like to call it technique headroom, to where you don't have to think about it, man. It's just natural, and you just do it. And that's what I saw, man. There was no thinking, man, going on. You were just there.
Man, I appreciate it. You know what I tried to, I mean, there were so many peers there. It's like I can't fool myself and say there weren't some nerves going on, because there definitely was. I mean,
you wouldn't be human if it wasn't.
I was nervous for all you guys.
I mean, just in that little, between Shannon and six people behind him,
Quentin and all those guys, like
stupid.
And I think Little John was back there at some point. You know?
He was standing next to me.
So I just okay, bring everything down. They don't have to slam this thing. You know what I mean? Just relax and just bring everything down, just like groove. And that's what I tried to do. It was a blast.
Fantastic.
John, that's awesome. You got this thing together, man. Thank you so much. I had a blast. I texted him the other day saying, still buzzing. You know, it was a blast.
How could you not? We talked for an hour and a half the day after. How could you not?
Good stuff. More to come too. That's what's
man.
great about it.
So what I thought we would talk about today is I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what makes studio drummers special. What makes them special? What are some of the intangibles? What are some of the traits? What are some of the things that make a great sounding drum track from the standpoint of a person who spends a lot of time in the studio? Because there's, regardless of how we like to think about, I'm going to take, my studio playing live, or vice versa, I'm going to take my live playing into the studio. There are certain things that accumulate over a period of time that make a great studio player a great studio player. And now that we got this guy in the house, we gotta pick his brain.
I think we'll find out the answer.
We're going to find it. And also, I think it's worth mentioning also to everybody that we've had Scott here for about 45 minutes before we started recording, and we were talking a little bit about how we were going to do this, and Scott was just like, I don't know, man. I just do it. We're going to press him. We're going to press him on this stuff. So one of the first things I want to ask, and we'll ask, everybody can respond on this also, is with today's kind of recording technology, there's a million different ways to record. And there's always we'll call it the old school way of recording, where we have the entire rhythm section in the studio at the same time to record. And then there's always, we can record individual tracks and lay stuff on top of it. Scott, what is your preference between those two?
I love cutting with a whole rhythm section.
Same here.
I love it. I don't do much without a click these days, because everybody wants to lock things up or just have them really tight so they can move things around if they need to. But man, I did a thing the other day with Chris Arias. He had some guys in, and it's just Pat Malone playing bass. It was magic. It was so much fun just to play with a bunch of players, and
make music.
That's my preference. Yeah.
What concept?
Novel idea, isn't it?
So, man, if you have to do, let's take 2 separate days, and you have to do one session that is just you playing to a click, knowing that later on there's going to be tracks laid on top of it. And then the next day, you are going to play with a rhythm section. But let's say that it's with a click, though, still.
Yeah.
Okay. What is your mindset? What's the difference between those 2 days and the way you're going to approach that?
I can probably see the bigger picture of the song more with the players, you know, and I can paint, I think, a picture more with a bunch of players, and like I know where the chorus is going to go, and I know like how to build the song more. Like if I'm just doing something with a click, and I've never really done anything like that, really, just like a click and drums.
Yeah.
Usually I do. If anything like that, there'll be some tracks I'm playing to.
Scratch.
You know what I mean? And it's pretty much
reference,
and you're not really, you know, you're just kind of laying out what the guy tells you to lay out pretty much.
Okay, so in other words, you're a little more conservative with the liberties that you might take when you're just playing with scratch tracks and just a click, knowing that things are going to be put on top of it.
Right.
After that, yeah.
Well, sometimes too, like live players might have you take it somewhere you weren't even thinking about.
Right, totally.
And that's the beauty of
And that's the magic when the producer, whoever, writer, songwriter goes, man, that's cool, let's do that.
Oh, you had a preconceived notion and it's just shot down, you know. And that's the best thing about live players for me. I just
yeah.
And Scott, you know, I kind of quit doing sessions for a long time because, you know, getting a crappy scratch track and a click, and I just was so unmotivated. And in recently done a few more, and it was with live players, and it just kind of reinvigorated me.
Yeah,
it's just better.
It really
Especially
is.
when you're playing with the guys we know, it's like, how could it not be? But in any event, man, it's going to happen. You're going to get some of those. So I think a lot of it is, and especially someone of your experience, you know, you pull from your instincts and that, and really try, you know, you can see the big picture even without players. And that's a gift that I think you have. So I've heard a number of tracks you've done where I know it was just that, but those instincts are a big part of it. And I think kind of touches on what you were talking about earlier, Phil. Like there's just certain players that are going to get that gift of vision and that gift of just seeing. And some of it is experience too. I know this is going to work, so here we are.
Yeah.
And that does set a Jeff Porcaro apart. He did 5 trillion sessions. You know, you're the same. For 30 years, you've been knocking out stuff. Your instincts are going to be huge.
Yeah.
Live players are not.
We were talking earlier too about fills and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And when I'm tracking, sometimes I'm like, dude, I do not want to do Debbie Boone going into the first chorus. I mean,
right.
But sometimes it's like the perfect thing. You know what I mean? Like how many times did Porcaro right?
That tune I played the other night, he did it like 12 times.
Right. Which, by the way, that was my favorite part of the evening. John playing JoJo. Hands down.
That's too kind.
My favorite part of the whole night. Not to take anything away from anybody else, but man, everybody else was awesome. But that was like got me right here in the heart. I mean, I was just, because you were it, dude. You know what it reminded me of? Abe Jr. playing with Paul McCartney. The joy. That's it.
I had it.
He had it, man.
I won't disagree with you, man.
I wanted to get that in. I know we're kind of diverting a little bit, but
that means a great deal. Really, really special, man. That whole night it brought out the best in everybody.
So if I can get that kind of joy in a recording session, I think it's going to translate to the song.
Definitely translates.
Yeah.
Well, you can hear it when you start second guessing yourself.
Sure.
Totally.
Or your confidence. You hear it like I've gotten 3 takes in and someone's wearing you out, and it's like I hear it in my playing. Like I guess this is right.
If I pay my cartage, guys, can I go?
Yeah, you know, this track is diminishing at every take. You know?
So now, with that in mind, okay, and we talk about like the instincts of you know, going in and playing certain tunes, and you know that may not want to play Debbie Boone, but you do it, right?
Right.
Okay.
First instinct, right?
So let's talk about this first take type thing. You've been in the studio, you've might to the demo, might even have a little chart scratched out something there for you.
Right.
If the session allows it, how much experimenting do you do on the first take?
Little.
Very little.
Very little. I'm thinking about crafting the song more at that point. Okay, basic. What's my basic first chorus? What's the bridge? The little turnaround before the second verse. That kind of thing, and then building the song throughout. I'm not going to take much liberty for doing some crazy whack, fill or something like that. I'm thinking
kick pattern. That alone is like it's got to be. We got to lock that down and make it right.
Like the song the other day we cut with Chris was. The first chorus was kind of open,
Yeah.
It wasn't a full-on first chorus. So I'm like, okay, how can I make this open but yet elevate it to a certain point? Not just laying out. It's like cymbals, like, doing a worship thing or something. It was more pop. It was a little bit, but it wasn't full-on yet. So that's how I thought ahead about it, So I just kind of just did a kick pattern with no snare, and kind of built up to the first turnaround and then in groove, something simple in the second verse,
Gotcha. Now, and that was the first take.
First
that you
take.
did. Now, here's the $1 million question. All right. You finish that first take and you go back and you listen and playback in the control room. Did you already know what it was going to sound like? And I'm talking about everything from what you played as far as like, oh, this is the appropriate part, to, yeah, I know it's going to feel good.
That first listen back, you learn so much. Because I don't know what it's going to sound like. Because I'm so focused on getting through it and doing the right thing. Then you go back in the control room and you're like, okay, that doesn't work. And I didn't really get that playing it down. Because you're getting feedback from the producer, at this point. Like when you hit the bridge, he goes, man, can you give me more activity there and build a little more, that kind of thing. And I get more of the big picture going in the control room and listening.
I gotcha. It would absolutely be fascinating to know. I would love. Wouldn't you like to take a poll of like different studio drummers, like in LA and in Nashville and everything, and just go like, what about you, John Robinson? What about you, Shannon Forrest? Do you already know what this thing's going to sound like? Now I know, man. I read a thing with Josh Freeze, and he said that he kicks himself in the butt virtually every single session that he does because he feels like that when he goes back in the playback that 90% of the time there's something that he did that he knows better that he shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
Now, isn't that interesting?
I can totally see that. I don't think I've ever done a track where I'm like, start to finish.
That's it.
There's some little beat somewhere, stupid hi-hat or, just something you're not happy with. Mm-hmm. And I think the minute you are, I think that's when you start to, you're not going to improve if you don't think you can improve. You know what I mean?
Striving
to
just be better and better. But that's also what keeps you working. As good as you are and as much experience as you have, that hunger to just keep stepping up is why you're relevant to this day, I think. And a number of successful guys who've been doing it forever. And if you talk to anybody who's been doing it as long as you have and at the level you've done it, I bet you everybody says the same thing.
Yeah. I would hope that. Yeah. Definitely.
I mean, there wouldn't, you're not, it has to be that way.
Now, one of the things I think that makes, again, studio players, whether it's drummers, any kind of rhythm section player, they are very aware of their tendencies when it comes to certain kinds of music, because that's one of the things that makes us human, right? We know we have tendencies to do this, that, or the other. And what I want to do is I want to take just a minute and let's all talk about a few different styles of music. And if you have any particular tendencies, anything from like, oh, I feel like I might rush this or I might drag that, or man, that's the one thing that I really do well, or man, that's one of the things that I would like to pass on if possible.
Yeah.
Right? So let's talk about shuffles. Okay, because we actually did a show about a month or so
went right
ago.
to the heart. Just a dagger.
Well, that's one of the well, if you think about it, also that's one of the ones that it's pretty relevant and timely for what we're doing here, because coming off of the Porcaro show, and then coming off of also we did a shuffle show as well. I think it's kind of interesting to talk about that one, because it's also one in today's modern music, it doesn't come up that much. And so it's one that might get neglected a little bit, and then all of a sudden you have to go into a session and somebody has a tune that's a shuffle. So what about you, John?
Just in regards to shuffle, or just in general?
Just shuffles.
To me, I naturally feel a shuffle, so that's an advantage, and because some people don't. It's always been really natural for me to play a shuffle or anything that kind of swings.
Yeah.
That's just I'm lucky in that sense, and some people have to really dig into that. But especially as far as recording goes, man, we overlook the hi-hat, the right hand, and the right hand can dictate so much.
Well, it's going to be the blues a lot of times.
Oh, we got to lay back 2 and 4. Oh, this kick pattern and all that. Man, when it comes to shuffles, your right hand is going to make or break it, in my opinion, and that leaves a ton of interpretation. You could talk about the continued shuffle. You could do more of a swing pattern, even if it's a 2 and 4 thing, and then the subtleties in between. That's where I learned hard lessons when I started doing more recording about shuffles in the right hand. So to me, and there's a million opinions about it, but to me, I probably focus on that more than anything at this point.
Well, with that in mind, though, when you said that you learned a couple of hard lessons, what were the lessons though that like what were your tendencies?
Way too focused on kick and snare pattern, which in more of an eighth note feel, you definitely that factors in a little more. But man, I learned a hard lesson in I'm just phoning it in over here, because I'm kind of in that eighth note mentality.
Right.
Oh, 2 and 4 and the kick pattern. Man, that ain't mean nothing if it ain't swinging.
Did it?
So the right hand is way more of a factor to me.
Did it affect just the overall feel to where it didn't feel right, or did you feel like, man, maybe I'm pushing, or maybe I'm behind?
More feel.
Yeah.
Because it's probably do a click.
Right.
But that inherent swing and the subtlety, and then maybe even ghost notes in your left hand that can create so much vibe in a shuffle. I think maybe I just was playing it safe and not really focused on the subtleties that make a shuffle, probably more than anything, magic. So the hard lessons where you listen back and it's just kind of laying there, and you're like, I would never play that live that way. I would be swinging the balls off, and a lot of that comes from your hands.
Scott, what about you with shuffles?
Shuffles they're tricky with me, man. They're not natural for me. I mean, a song like JoJo, that's a fun song to play. It just kind of sits right in there. But like a slow country shuffle, or more of like a triplet hi-hat feel, is so hard, because you're let's just say it's like low mid tempo, like 85, that's more like 79, or somewhere around there, right?
Yeah.
And then then the click. What are you gonna do with the click? And you can't do triplets,
No.
right?
Right.
So, and it's like maybe a straight up traditional country thing, like even slower than that. That is so hard, because your click's going bump, click, click, click. You can drive
Not this
a
time.
truck.
Maybe next. Good luck. Nice try.
Mm-hmm.
That's a click to me.
It's horrendous. It's like it's so bad. And, people are like, Meeder, do we have to have like triplets on the click? But that's the only way I can get through it maybe sometimes. It's just
certain tempos.
It's just not in me. It's just not there.
Man, but we're talking shuffles in you. We're talking extremes here with tempo. And that's not in any way, shape, or form saying that
right.
That's not a challenge, because it's harder than anything to play that stuff slow. But that's where, when you say it's not in you, no, it's not in anybody at that tempo, man. And that's what sets the men apart.
But there, it is shuffle wise. It's definitely a pull for me a little bit. I don't really naturally sit there. You know?
Well, that kind of leads in also to the next style that I want to talk about. I want to talk about that 12/8 kind of a thing, because especially, man, those slower 12/8s. My tendency,
where I just
hands
was,
down, my is to rush the bass drum. I don't know what it is, but there's something about those slower 12/8 things that has a tendency for the bass drum to want to be a little bit on edge. I don't know. And then likewise, if you think in terms of fast 12/8s, and the one that we always talk about on the show is, and again, getting back to Porcaro, is his version of Ruby Baby on the Fagan Nightfly, that really fast. You sit there and you think, especially intellectually, you sit there and you think, well, you know, if you look at this tempo, if those were actually 16th notes, in other words, if it's the same rate of speed as 16th notes, you're sitting there and you're looking at it and you're going, well, really, it's really not that big of a deal, but we're not used to phrasing in those triplets at that type of speed. And it's incredibly difficult, man.
Right.
Boy, the tendency to fall apart on that, because you just don't normally think of those 12/8s at that speed unless you're Porcaro. You know?
I know.
I'm
Go back and
completely
try to
wrong.
play Tears for Fears.
Right.
I mean,
You can
try
get
that
turned
for
around
5 minutes,
quick,
man.
No doubt.
Yeah. So, John, any questions or any thoughts about the 12/8 feel, man? That
The 12/8 feel to me, I think the hardest thing for me is not what I'm playing, but it's playing to the click, because, man, I want that backbeat to be almost too far back.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that naturally with that, you know, and modern day, man, I've actually done some stuff where I was like, man, that's awesome. You get it back and it's gridded up and everything's gone.
Right.
So that's my biggest challenge with that, with slower, especially slower 12/8, is like, man, I want that thing to be like so far back and vibed out, and it's hard to do. It's when you're not playing with live players,
Right.
man. It's like, oh, you're done. They're gonna grid it up.
Right. And just talking about that back thing,
Mm-hmm.
I'll try to hold back because my tendency is to rush on that kind of stuff, especially with a hi-hat.
yeah.
You know, so then I'll try to lay back, and then it sounds intentional and it sounds like it's dragging, and that's not. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's just, and then you're like,
Well, then sometimes people
Guess
come in and
second
just phone it
guessing
in and play over you, and you really sound like you're dragging, even though if you're not.
right.
It could be right with a click, and someone's like on top, and that when you're talking about that kind of vibe, I think it's better going all in, everybody playing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that freaking phenomenon that you talked about, we need to come up with a name for that, because it is. We've talked about it on the show a couple times, but I've never heard anybody completely and totally address it. And Scott, kind of what we're talking about is, in one of the best ways I can describe it is this, is that I went to a restaurant where there was like a single solo guy that was doing, he was doing everything, right? He's playing tracks and he's playing guitar and singing and playing horn and whatnot. And on his tracks, of course, were all the percussion, all the drum stuff.
Right.
And you know that stuff is completely and totally in time, right? You know it's just gridded completely perfectly. But I swear to you, man, any type of melodic reference that if it gets out of time, the human ear wants to follow that. And, man, you can make a metronome seem out of time. That's the only thing, that the only way that I can rationalize that is this, that the human ear wants to follow melody over rhythm.
Yeah, I've had battles with that.
Yeah.
Guitar player really pushing, and
it makes
like,
you sound wrong. It makes you sound wrong, and you can be, I mean, dead on to a click.
It doesn't matter.
And it doesn't matter.
Right.
What is that phenomenon? It is just...
Some of it is if you turn the click off and you just did that ebb and flow with the push and pull with everybody, that's some of the magic, believe it, in my opinion. You know, sometimes when the click can be your friend and it can be your enemy as well, that well, maybe everybody wants to kind of go there, pick up a little bit, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sections oftentimes.
Right. I mean, look
That
at
bridge
Gaucho.
should
I have to
live.
bring that up again, but every section of that song had a certain feel to it, and everybody was there with Porcaro when he cut it. It's like it was just magic. And you put a click to that thing, it's kind of 124, 125 ish.
Yeah.
But it's when they come back to that turnaround every time, it's the same pocket, and it's just if they could have cut that with a click,
vacuum.
I'm not sure they had that same magic, guys. I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
No,
it would have sterilized it a bit. That's for sure, man. Because I've often thought also a lot of times on a lot of those older sessions that they might have started those things to a click and then pulled it out.
Right.
And because again, a lot of those guys that played in those rhythm sections, they had been playing together for years, and they kind of knew those individual tendencies as well. And man, again, that's part of the magic of it. That if you did have the entire thing completely and totally lined up to a click or had them play it to a click, it would have been significantly more difficult to manipulate and maybe fall back a little bit on this or push a little bit when you got to that. And so if you pull that thing out and those guys trust each other the way that they do, that's the magic, man. That absolutely is.
I do want to add also when I'm cutting, if somebody's rushing or whatever, I have a tendency to not like sway with them. I get kind of pulled.
Me too.
And that's that human ear thing you're talking about. I guess we're going that way, and it's just like you don't even know you're doing it, and all of a sudden you start hearing the click flamming.
I think sometimes I think your personality plays into that too. Like I'm not one to musically battle. So I think sometimes you're even though man, we should be sticking to the click. It's almost like I kind of feel like, man, I don't want to be this guy's like,
we're here.
That annoys me to no end when anybody does that. And so maybe sometimes our personalities are allowing that to happen too. But oftentimes someone that's a real strong player, even if they're wrong, you got to go with them.
Yeah.
I mean, especially guitar players, man, it's like when they're really grinding, if they're strong, but they're strongly feeling on top of the beat, you don't have a lot of choice.
Within the bounds of good taste, if they're rushing, and what I mean by that is if it just doesn't completely and totally get way, way off the click. If it's technically a hit, it's like Scott said, if you go with it and it feels okay when the click is pulled out, it can be fine.
Yeah.
It can be completely and totally fine in that way, when that's the case. But yeah, man, there are times that when that does happen, it's hard to not, I like to say, overcorrect, when you do that. And then that creates that old hump,
Like you're pulling back the guitar player that's rushing, whatever.
Right.
Yeah. And I have humps on my own. I don't need help.
Well,
Come on.
And even worse, the other thing, man, that when I hear myself on record do this, man, this is one of those things where you put your head down, is that when you do feel if something's pulling away, either ahead or behind, there's always the tendency to want to overcorrect too quickly, and that's what, it's amazing, isn't it, how our brain can literally overcorrect between clicks, on a metronome, whereas you got to just calmly relax a little bit and let it fall back where it needs to be over a period of a measure or two, or vice versa, push it just a little bit over a measure or two, and it'll get back where it needs to be.
Get back on the rails, so to speak. Yeah,
that sort of thing. It's incredible, man, how your mind can adjust that quickly.
Even on a more primitive level, when we count off 30 songs in a night, and how you grab it and you're gone, like that kind of thing. So that it makes perfect sense that overcorrecting, you would do it that quickly because you're just like, you have to do it. You got to fix it, and it's like, man, I think some of these guys can just manipulate that back into things, and
seamless.
Yeah, there's that live Rufus record. I never noticed it because John Robinson's so freaky good, but a friend of mine who's super like just locked into stuff, he goes, man, it's incredible how like he'll be playing and like they come back into a verse, and at beat 2 he will just change the tempo and suck it back in where it's supposed to be, and you don't even notice it. And I started listening, and I'm like, oh my God, man, this guy is out of his mind.
He's pretty good.
Happening.
Pretty good.
And you don't notice, So But at the same time, man, that to be fair, that's a band who's well rehearsed and trust each other, been playing together for years. Sometimes we're doing sessions with guys we play with once every 6 months. So that challenge is significantly more difficult.
Right.
When you have...
Or some guys you've never played with,
True. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that trust and that vibe and that knowing tendencies can be a really difficult thing to navigate. So we always got to kind of keep it in mind. Like, you can't really frame something as the norm, because as session players, it's never the norm. Really.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think not only do we need to remember if we're recording, but also I think it's something that should be celebrated. Like, man, you navigate through this stuff. It's not always if I could do every session I ever did with Joe Rita, my life would be so easy, everybody's would, but that's not going to happen. So I think that's what sets apart a lot of, like in your case and in Joe's case too. I never hear you guys sound bad with somebody different.
Wow, thank you, John.
And that not only is musical integrity, and there's intellectual advantage of just having that experience and having that, but there's also some give and take to that I think we forget about sometimes, man. So that challenge is brutal, session to session.
When you are doing a session and you've got full live rhythm section there, I think it's fascinating to hear what everybody likes to hear in their mix, because there's certain things that we won't necessarily have to name certain things, but there's certain things that I don't even want in my ears. And then how do you like to mix the click in with those also? I think that's an interesting thing also. What do you like, Scott?
Let's start with the click.
Okay.
I like to just, if I'm with it, it's kind of like just buried. You know what I mean?
Sure.
As I'm getting older, I think, the hearing could be going a little bit. So I'm trying to like not have the click just tear my head off.
Well, with that in mind, do you have a preferred tone?
I used to love the MPC click, which is started from the Uri click way back. But I think it's got a lot of low end in it. It's got a lot.
Sure does.
And I think that does, over time, the transient of that click has done some damage. So I switched to more like the Ableton kind of click, which is more of a wood tone.
I love that.
Brighter.
It's brighter, and you can bury it more. You don't have to have it lighten up your ears, like beyond, getting a headache. So you can bury it, and it still pops through a little bit, just enough. And I feel like if you have the click really loud, it's a distraction more than it is,
1,000% agree.
You bear that thing, and you're kind of in tune with the song more than the click. And the click's kind of there, and you just kind of forget about it. It's just a guide. It's subliminal.
I've always said that if the click's too loud, it forces you to play target practice with it.
Exactly.
And if it's a little bit lower, you then get to establish your own time feel over it, which is that's what you want to do anyway. Right? So now, Scott, let's say they were cutting with the rhythm section, right? And you got drums, bass, guitar, and keys that are all cutting simultaneously. Then you got the click. What is your order of mix as far as like, what do you like? Hottest?
I'd say
loudest?
Bass, then click.
Okay.
Key. I like everything. I really do, but vocal's probably going to be the lowest.
Yeah.
It kind of goes down the line in particular. Yeah. I like to hear everyone, but it's not. I'm so bad about being influenced time-wise. If I'm trying to be solid, not like so rigid and all that, but if I'm trying to be solid with the track, I don't like to be dictated about like what we talked about earlier, being pulled or pushed, or, or drawn back. I like some of that, but
Here's what I found on Wikipedia.
Oh, hey, Alexa. Thanks for joining the show.
Hey,
Who is this buffoon talking about recording drums?
I'm going to give her her own mic.
I love it.
So go ahead, man.
So if I've got somebody way too hot or whatever, I got to hear everybody. But if they're too hot, I can be easily go with them and just like get off the tracks a little bit, So I like starting with bass, the hottest, other than drums. I don't like to work too hard. I like drums up, but not like excruciating.
Yeah, I don't like.
But
I like to.
But I don't like them so low that I'm struggling with digging the tones out.
Right.
Because you know how you get to that point where you're hitting so hard that they choke down, man. Drums will choke on you if you just bam bam the whole time. So I try to just be relaxed and not dig too hard on them. And in order to do that, I like room. I don't like a lot of direct sound. I like room, not reverb, but just the room, how the drums sound in a room. I love that. Yeah, it makes you play different.
Yeah.
If you hear the snare with a little compression on it, you're going to play less. You're going to play less. Too many some ghosting is great, but too much is too much,
Sure.
But if you got that where the snare opens up and it's got a little decay on it because of the room and the compression, I love it. It just makes me play more relaxed, like I'm not trying to dig too much out of the kit. Then bass, and then keys, guitar, whatever, probably even. And then vocal probably low. The vocal is just a guide at that point.
Yeah.
It's not the star of the show. It is ultimately, but it's not at that moment. So,
man, speaking of like velocity and volume, all that, I started recording more at a time, and you're gonna know exactly what I'm talking about, where it was just like, man, smash them, just rip it up, man. It's not enough. I need more. And the challenges I had with that were twofold. One was I don't have a heavy right foot, so I'm already thinking about that crap versus just playing and relaxing. And then hitting harder, it affects your feel. And so I'd for a long time I'm getting stuff back like, it's okay. And then I realized, like, man, part of this is just it's unnatural for me to go in there and play like a caveman. Mm-hmm. The subtleties that maybe are my favorite part of my playing are gone.
Right.
And then just the pocket and the feel and all that, when you're just preoccupied with, I got to nail this kick drum and the snare drum, I need my hand over my head. And what's funny is when I was nervous for a long time coming out of that, I would find myself going back to that, like, and that's just not good. Mm-hmm. So I just a long-winded way of addressing, like, depending on when you come up or who you work with or what the preference or the sounds of the day, all of that, man, can influence so much how you go in your preconceived mind about laying down tracks, and it might be completely inappropriate. And that's a drag, man. Yeah. So just something that came to my mind, like I hate bashing in the studio.
Well, I was going to say then, you've mentioned several times about, you feel like you've got a lighter foot than a lot of people. When you do a session, do you have more bass drum dialed into your ears so you can hear it?
Man, I don't know. I think it's all about comfort. If I hear it and it's comfortable, I'm not really thinking about maybe in the mix, is that way louder? Or it's just, does it feel comfortable? And to me, what Scott was kind of getting at, I might have a little bit of snare drum. I rarely have toms in, just a little bit, but overheads, I'm getting the toms. Mm-hmm. And to me, I am my whole vibe with tom playing, which I rarely do. I don't hit a lot of toms when I play, but when I do, the natural sound of them is where I'm going to really connect, as opposed to mic'd up, loud, coming back at you. I can't, too much. Yeah. I can't do that. So I don't know if maybe it's louder. Maybe, I can't honestly say.
Where do you have the click then balanced in relation to the other stuff? Maybe
a little louder than he would, but that's just insecurity probably more than anything, I guess. But I like it a little louder. I think sometimes I've had to click a little louder because of some problems with other people not locking too.
Yeah.
And I'm expected to lock it down, and you're like, well, I've got to defer to that click, so it's going to be brought up a little bit because I know this producer wants that, and they're probably going to grid it out or editing, So the click volume can be sometimes dictated by the producer or the vibe of the song or what have you. So it's not really a well, this is how I do it kind of thing.
It just depends on the application, the
Absolutely.
song. Yeah. So let me ask you a question, John. When you're like you get your overheads at a certain level, does that make you play a little bit different? Like maybe not smash your crashes so much? Because like, man, I don't know about you, but every time I wail on a 19 or, on my right especially, because that's what gets the most abuse.
Yep.
Okay, that's another. It's like taking a puff of cigarette. Like you're taking. You just took 20 seconds off your life or whatever. You just took.
This is killing you.
I don't know what it is lately, but I'm thinking about like those cymbals now.
Well, part of it, I think, is bashing cymbals has become way more expected from us. Just the vibe and the approach to modern drumming. So you got to find that healthy little place where you can do that and it's not distracting or it's not, debilitating, which it can be.
Mm-hmm.
I think, we all, the three of us, come from a time and an influence where there wasn't as much of that. So now you're talking about the sound of the cymbal alone. You've got to get it right. How that cymbal responds.
How is that? Are you really smashing the crash, or does it sound like
shanking it, or
bringing it out? Is that attitude going to come out in the track?
Totally.
Foo Fighters,
Well, that is exactly right, man. That if you think about it, if you really think about it, back in the day, and that day was a Wednesday, the only people that you really thought of when it came to like either washing out crashes or rides, and it was kind of unique, would be like either Bonham or like Alex Van Halen. It's on every freaking record now, just about. It's a rock record.
Right.
I mean, it's as much or more the norm than hearing an actual ride cymbal beat. So
definition.
Yeah, the definition of that.
Yeah, I agree. To kind of answer the other part of that question about cymbals and smash and I've never been I've never been heavy-handed with cymbals. Like I'm a slicer, and it's kind of more like I've never been like just laying out, going on that, and it served me well recording for sure. But the bigger challenge is when they want to lift it up and you rock. It's just that's been a hard thing to do,
Did you ever hear the story about Porcaro when he was asked to play louder and louder?
Oh yeah, with the sticks right through the heads.
Yeah, I think it was a Streisand session, wasn't it?
Is it that or is Ricky Lee Jones?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember who it was. Just is that loud enough for you? The sticks through and he was out,
I think
right?
he left.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm living vicariously through him as we speak, just for that session alone.
So this topic, what we got on the cymbals thing is actually, it's perfectly leading into the entire topic of, is there a particular type of, we'll call it like a volume hierarchy that you like to stick to in a session? Like, do you intentionally lay off cymbals a little bit in a session? Do you intentionally watch your right hand on your hi-hat? Because, the old thing is hi-hat gets in everything, right? Intentionally maybe use a little bit more left hand on the snare drum. Are you more careful when you do your drum fills that the drum fills don't get swallowed, so to speak, that you got to make those things play, with maybe a little bit more intention, a little bit more definition?
I think all the above. I mean, it depends on the song.
I'm a genius, man.
All the above, yeah. I've particularly lately it's taken me 30 years to realize that my right hand's too strong.
Interesting.
On the hi-hat, definitely. I mean, listen to this Porcaro stuff. It's so subtle.
You don't even realize.
I know. It's so subtle and just, it's so much a huge part of the groove, but yet so subtle in the same token, So I'm constantly aware of my right hand now and trying to get it lower,
Yeah.
It's just too, I listen back to some of these tracks, it's way too much right hand.
And it can totally dictate feel.
Right.
Yeah.
I
too much shanking rather than just,
the tip
sometimes. And
yes. Yeah. I certain feels, man, you can't shank.
Right.
Up tempo. You can't.
Power through it. Then you wonder why your hands cramped up.
Terrible.
2 minutes in.
Mm-hmm. I would have to say, other than the kick drum thing, I never think about any of that. Now, if someone asks, then I've got to deliver, and sometimes I overthink it and it becomes a problem, or it takes a while to adjust. But when I play, I don't think about, I better lay off my right hand here. If you realize it time and time again, you're hearing tracks you did, and you're like, well, then you're going to adjust. But
right,
I think I try not to think about that. I'm not heavy-handed in regards to, like, I don't play the snare drum so loud that it's just overbearing to everything else, or cymbal-wise, I'm a little more finesse there. Those things kind of naturally translate well, and I thank God for that, because if I had to think about it, especially in a studio, I'd never get asked back.
Like watching you play the other night, you had some pretty high stick heights, but it was more of a fluid thing. I think that's the difference.
Motion.
Yeah, there's motion and there's fluidity, but it's solid and it's not like stiff and, that's what I noticed about you playing the other night.
Interesting, man, is when we got done at sound check, I was asking Shannon, like, man, I felt like, am I playing too loud? We were out front and all this. And he goes, you're not playing as loud as anybody. And I was like, I thought, you're full of crap, man. Because I feel like I was. But the deception is fluidity versus velocity. And so we've talked about this a number of times. For me, I'm obsessed with motion now, because I think that dictates feel more than anything, more than sound or where your microphones are or where the click is or who's rushing or dragging. Your fluidity of motion, through a verse. If you don't have that together, it's going to suck. And so that's all I think about now. I don't think about anything else, but I think some of that, you maybe see me going up, man. It's more about time and vibe and feel. Like, for some reason, that is helping me achieve that. It's not about, because I'm probably not hitting that hard.
It's perfect. It's the tones are so there, but you look like you're doing a lot more, but it's just not. It's that slamming kind of stiff sound. I love that.
Definitely fluidity over velocity. I don't care about playing loud anymore. I hate it. I hate playing loud. Hate it.
And some people have said on my plan that I don't look like I'm hardly working.
But it's really probably way louder than me.
It's like Bob Horner. Remember Bob Horner had that short, compact stroke, but he hit 4 home runs in a game? Remember that?
And you're like, wait, how did that happen?
So...
You're thinking Dave Kingman.
Right.
Coming out of his shoes.
And I think a lot of that is the studio stuff, where I'm kind of like trying to stay at 75%. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
But though, to kind of address both of these topics as far as like motion and height, stick height doesn't always have to dictate volume. Right.
Right.
I'm a perfect example of that.
And I'll tell you the one, if I ever have a student that I'm like trying to teach some kind of like a molar technique to, the first thing I'll do is I'll say, go watch some videos of Omar Hakim play. You will never see somebody that has, I don't want to call it exaggerated, but has a more fluid, rounded off motion that's not just a basher that gets high stick heights whenever he plays and stuff. And that is one of the things that dictates that incredible feel that he's got also, is those roundness of the motions and the consistencies of it that make that stuff sound so good and feel so good. And then, man, to your point, I mean, Scott, like I said, I was standing 3 feet behind you, man, when you were playing, and kind of the economy of motion that you have when you play and with your hands when you do that stuff, man, there's no power lost in that, because, you can take somebody like, think in terms of like Bernard Purdy also. Here's another guy. You don't see him coming over his head, man. All of his motions are really small, but man, it's like a freaking shotgun, man, whenever he plays. So the type of motion that you make that creates the time between the time, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the magic and the consistency of that. And like I said, stick heights versus stick lowness is not mutually exclusive to volume.
Well, we don't have the same body.
It's more eye candy, though. You know what I mean?
I don't know about that. I don't think about that.
I remember a session I did where it was a really involved piece for an audio visual type of deal. They were going to show at a convention kind of thing, and
industrial kind of
industrial deal, like a 5-minute piece that had all these time changes, kicks, and everything. And they were video taping the deal at the same time. Okay, so I'm buried in this piece of music, and I have the economy of motions going on, right? You know, I'm just trying to get this thing right, and the videographer comes up like between takes. Can you look a little more animated?
Yeah.
Wrong thing, right?
You're trying to survive.
I'm trying to survive and get a good take on this thing, and I gotta worry about how I look. You know,
man, that's
it
not a
bad.
good place for me
Yeah.
to be.
Yeah.
So I didn't make the final cut on that one.
I get so self-conscious of that. Like,
you know,
video on you. Like, I hate a camera on me.
I want to step.
Is he hurt?
He's wounded.
Should we give him some pain medication? Why is he mad?
I want to step back 1 second and address one quick thing. That when we were talking about the whole thing about the kind of the balance and the volume hierarchy on the drum set, there's one thing that I've noticed about whenever I hear myself play back on something that I could just kick myself in the butt every single time, and I'm very aware of it now, is that when you have to play some sort of an ensemble figure, I always used to not play those things strong enough to where it would seem a little bit muddy or muddled. So that's the one thing I wanted to add in there, is that when there's ensemble figures that have to be played, I always tend to go more on the hard side or on the heavier side of things, especially if you're having to move around the kit, if you're moving around the toms. Because a lot of times, man, the articulation of that kind of thing, it sounds either just wrong, you know, it sounds unconfident when you do that, or there's just no definition to it. And so that's the one thing that I always think of, man, when it comes to doing that sort of thing, is just make sure that stuff has a little more point to it and a little more intention to it.
I like it.
Sometimes less is more in that thing too.
Yeah, right.
So true.
If you get too ghosty, so to speak, on that, and you don't go for the meat and potato of those things, that's where you run into problems also. You're exactly right, man.
Well, like a perfect example is some of that circ stuff you do.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain fills that are matching a melody and all that.
Baby,
you know,
I'm hanging on for dear life.
and you're just like, you got to play them clean and precise, and the attack and all that factors in. Whereas if you're just kind of flowing through it, sometimes that doesn't work.
You're getting your practice in with those ad shows you do too, right? I mean,
yeah.
There's a lot of unison licks in those things, right?
Yeah. And it's the kind of thing, man, that when you have to think about the voicing of those, because again, sometimes if you don't play them with the right type of voicing, if they're too cymbally, so to speak,
right?
You know, or sometimes if they're too drummy and they're not on the right drums, it doesn't sound right either. And it's funny, man. Again, you talk about somebody like Porcaro. They just know how that stuff's supposed to sound.
That gaucho thing, it's like he just hit everything he hit was perfect. Did he think about it, or did it just flow out? And I want to believe it just was like, yeah, of course I played that right. Hit the right cymbal and the right tom.
Yeah.
You know? But navigating through that, and I know you learned it, it's like, I'd probably just sort of muddy on through and hope I hit one. Yeah.
But listen to that track. The thing about Jeff is he's so first instinct idea, and I don't think he thinks, okay, I'm going to do this fill, and then I'm going to do a little more of this fill, and then by the end he doesn't think that way. If you listen to that gaucho track, for instance, he does a bigger fill going into the first turnaround than the second one. He just kind of lifts a hat and gives a little space there. You know, where I think totally opposite of that. I think I don't want to do too much at first, but he's like, what's his instinct in that moment? And that's what.
One of the coolest things in that track is the and of 4 open hi-hat into the little turnaround.
Right.
And it's like, that sticks out to me more than anything he did, which is so bizarre. But
and in the first turn, he kind of hits that like that tom thing to the 1. Doom, 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 doom. Bah, doom, doom. Right?
Crazy.
Which I'm thinking, I probably would have saved that for the second time. That's just the way I think.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But to that point, man, that little thing like you're talking about, like the end of 4 going into count 1, you don't need any more than that on that. But that's the thing. That's, again, to the brilliance of that. He's the one that thought of it, though.
Yeah.
And the next backbeat is so back.
Right, totally. And you talk about, that vacuum, that and of 4 hi-hat thing's like, shh,
Yeah.
Totally.
And so I think what we don't realize is we're in context and in the space of beat 4 to beat 2, that we are so locked to that because it's so musically perfect that some of those fills I don't remember. But for some reason in that subtlety of that open hi-hat into that downbeat, and you're just like, your ear is just like, because the magic of,
right.
We talked about that vacuum, like just locking it back in, and then his ability to hit 2 where most
and
of
the
us
difference
wouldn't.
between a Jeff Porcaro and a Scott Meeder would be 2, 3, Debbie Boone crash. Right?
Yep. Yeah, I know. I it was nice of you to use your name instead of mine, but yes.
Hey, now that we were talking about backbeats, on a traditional, just a rock tune, just medium tempo, 112 BPM. Scott, do you always play rim shots?
Always.
John?
Yes, infinity.
Okay.
110% of the time.
Now, let's go a different direction. 66 BPM, backbeat, tubby snare drum. Think Don Henley 1976. Backbeat, rim shot, or center of the drum.
I'm going to go with, depending on the song,
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking I'm going to maybe put a fat head on it and hit it in the center.
Uh-huh.
Because you get a little more tone that way.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You know?
John.
To me, it comes down to the engineering and if it's right, if it sounds right.
Yeah.
That factors in a lot, and it's like your ear will tell you. You go back in and you're hitting a rim shot, and it's like it's not. And you go back, but those sounds were brought on by 2-inch tape and saturated levels and all that, and so there's a lot of guys who can't bring that out as an engineer. So it's kind of like
tape compression and all that stuff.
Yeah, man, it can be like that. Playing into a drum can be it doesn't sound great sometimes if you don't have the right tools and the right engineer to do it. Like digitally, that's a real crapshoot.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll just replace it with a sample because that's not working. But, I would probably tend to err on the playing into the drum. But then, man, that's hard to, when you're used to backbeats,
it's
playing
hard to
into
hit
a drum.
center.
It's hard to get your feel and everything
Right.
suffers, and you're thinking. Again, you're thinking. That's exactly
That's it.
What
That's
you're
exactly
thinking.
what it is.
I tilt the drum a little more.
Yeah.
Anything I can do to cheat,
Because sometimes a producer will ask for it. Hey, man, can you just hit in the center of the drum?
Right. But, there's something oddly satisfying, though, at times when you do that thing, when you've got the head tuned down low and you have like those 40-strand snares hanging. You know what I mean? There's something oddly satisfying about almost feeling that drum head almost like wrap around your stick, man. Especially
Right.
if you butt in that thing in the middle of the snare.
It's magic.
See, like,
sometimes.
right down the street, I was able to do that, and it was amazing because it
12
was
volts?
2-inch tape.
Well, yeah.
And it was like, I had a big fat snare drum with literally like hanging off. Mm-hmm. And one of the best, my favorite snare drums I ever got, snare sounds, was that because it was just so different. But then again, it's kind of like crack, you're just chasing that high again. Like I haven't been able to really.
I remember
come
that
close to
record.
it.
That was John produced that, right?
Yep.
Killer.
It was amazing. And now, like every time I come even close to that, it's like, well, it's close, and you're just like, but hard though, man. Playing into a drum. I know you did it for years, and then went away from it.
TG and the V, man, I hit it in the middle quite off. I mean,
but then that challenge now, as much as you did it, to come back.
It was as much of a challenge to rim everything.
Yeah,
coming out of that, hitting in the center.
Oh yeah, makes perfect sense.
As is now going back to the center. It's a challenge.
That's incredible.
Now, we all know that the days of the big studios and the big rooms are few and far between. But now, if you had your perfect world, Scott, do you like the big open live room to track drums in, or do you like a smaller, more contained, drier, deader room?
Kind of in between. Like the other day, we cut at Murray, which is over at Mount Perrin, and the studio is probably, as big as your lower area here.
Did you use that house kit?
Yep. And there's something about that room. It's not too much. Like I mentioned earlier, I just like to hear drum room, just open room in my ears.
Well, the ceilings aren't as high as a lot of rooms that big.
It's just the perfect amount of room that I like, and it's just sometimes when you get a little drum booth or a small studio in your home or whatever, sometimes you can get a little compressed or not enough room for me personally. But the whole cavernous thing, I think, is, it just doesn't float my boat, man. I like the kind of in between, medium size.
What about you, man?
I'm with you. A big room. It's like, unless you're doing a Led Zeppelin record, it's just sort of like, oftentimes it's just distracting, and there's the definition and some of the subtleties suffer at hand of that. And then in a tighter room, other than if you're doing like Bill Withers record or something, it's kind of like, my playing is so open, and there's just so much space in it that a tighter room can be a kind of a drag. I need a little bit of help.
I get a little gun shy if everything's so dry and tight. Everything is exposed.
It's like you're
every single nuance.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything.
I used to do some sessions in Memphis at a long dead studio that was called 3 Alarm, and the reason it had that name is it was in an old fire station. And so naturally that's a big room.
It's a cavern in those garage, right?
Yeah. And I'll never forget what this one guy said, and it kind of encapsulated, I think, what you guys are talking about in this large room, because they used to cut everything just wide open in the middle of this room. He used to say, "Man, I'm having problems getting this happening because this room's too swimmy." Think about that for a minute. In other words, it's kind of one of those things that no matter how you tweak your ears,
called a church.
Well, yeah, but you have so much ambient bleed that comes in
just on the snare mic
alone,
right?
That it's hard sometimes to be able to get that good balance of the definition that you would like to get. But then again, like you said, John, if you're in a booth, sometimes, man, everything is so tight. All the sounds are so contained that all of a sudden you kind of lose your vibe because you don't have enough air surrounding the stuff that you're playing. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Scott, we're kind of finishing up here with our stuff. I think we've picked your brain a good bit. Is there anything else you want to add? Anything that comes to mind? Anything you want to talk about? Tips for these folks about going in the studio?
What's helped me is just ask your guys to send you a tape, or not tape. Aging myself here, aren't I?
None of us flinched.
Send a telegram over to them.
No, I love now having, if you just send me a rough so I can get around the tunes a little bit. Don't be afraid to do that. Just, sit with them a little bit. Maybe write you a little cheat sheet. Make some notations.
Place,
yeah, you're a little more prepared. I'd say just be prepared. Something I heard the other day that forgot who it was, but they were talking about, it was a drummer. They were talking about the difference in being prepared and practicing. They're two different things. You can practice like a song over and over again, but the music is going to be different once you get in that application, once you get there. It's not going to be anything like you preconceived it to be. But if you're prepared and you've done all these things, and to have them at your disposal, to be ready to bring them out, dictating where the music is going to go, that's the difference. And I like thinking being prepared and not, I know I need to practice more. We all do, right?
You're talking about me and all my people here, inside here?
But it just hit me. I don't know, being prepared for where you're going to go musically. And whatever that means to me, if I'm doing a jazz gig, I need to work on some whatever. Not saying you're going to do that beat, but if it happens, you're prepared for it, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, I think the inherent nature of our instrument too, it's kind of a drag not to be. That's like the challenge of the veal gig sometimes. You know, we're used to doing gigs where we are just like, I'm the guy.
Right.
And that's what it should be. And then some you're just like, I don't know this song, and I'm kind of swimming through it, and
you're not the guy there on that one.
And all that. And that's a drag, because most of those songs you need to be the guy. So preparedness, if it's just, for me, the advantage of just having an idea, like you say, cheat sheets or anything, some little subtle, just psychological crutches alone can bring out the best in you.
Right. And I don't know how some of these guys that want to do the studio thing, how they feel about click. I think most of them are pretty okay with it, because a lot of these guys are playing in churches and they're playing with tracks and everything. But what helped me is just not just playing with click, but I grew up playing with drum machine stuff, which has got a little more feel to it. You're not, and I didn't play with click live. I grew up playing without ears, monitor ears, so through the wedge, all we had was just like Linn drum and stuff, kind of busting through the wedge for time. So, because you couldn't have a click,
Yeah.
So that was kind of what solidified me time-wise, which is playing with something with feel to it. That way you're just not like just sterile with a click, But I would encourage guys to work at home with something musically that's locked in, rather than just a click,
If you don't practice, and for teachers, if you don't teach with metronomes and or sequences, you are committing educational malpractice. Because I've said it once, I'll say it 100 more times. It wasn't that long ago that I was in school. And if you would have told me at that time, back in those days, that virtually every live gig that I do now is to either a metronome and or sequence, I'd say you're out of your mind. So, I mean, things have changed dramatically in a short period of time. And to further your point, man, if for anybody who's listening to this, if you've got any hopes of working any type of a meaningful gig and being a professional musician that freelances, you've got to be comfortable with this stuff. Not only comfortable playing with it, you're better off if you know how to program it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really are.
Which I'm not good at it. I'm just not. I mean, it just doesn't click with me. I mean, I can run it. Hey, man, you got all the tunes laid out? I can fire them.
Yeah.
But editing for me is just,
I've had to learn how to do it.
God bless you, man.
Yeah.
I haven't. I can run my rhythm watch. I'm gonna stay old school.
If I'd have on that gig, Precaro night, you had the metronome for me.
It wouldn't have been good. That would have been a mistake. Your instincts were dead on. Just play. I don't think anybody played to a click that night.
Did anybody reference it at all?
I did on the first tune. Just because I was so scattered though. Like, I was wearing 12 different hats. So at least I'm not going to be 4 bars in going, is it right?
I probably would have heard 116 for low down and that's too slow.
Of course.
Forget it.
That's your instincts. Like,
yeah.
And the beauty of all your experience.
It took me a while to settle in a little bit. It's just the nerves. And
I think other than John, that was pretty much par for the course that night. Of course, he comes out like, whatever.
Black Friday was dead on.
That dude. I got a story real quick I got to tell you guys. I posted a video, and Black Friday was a video on the drum forum. And And then so there's links to others in the description, all that. And a guy was like, well, clearly your Gaucho guy did his homework, but the other guy, Black Friday guy, didn't. And he to his defense,
he came back.
I buried
him.
around. I buried him. So he came back and was like, yeah, that was out of line. Then I'm thinking, like, you don't get Stevie Wonder's gig coming in unprepared. So let's back up and revisit your. And to his defense, he came back like, yeah, that was stupid. But I was thinking, like, man, I told John, do your thing, man. I didn't tell anybody they had to play note for note. I never said a word to you about what to play, other than this is a song.
Honor the part,
the vibe, the tempo. Yeah, you gotta be in the ballpark,
right?
But John needed to be John. That's why people were there and wanted to hear him, and it was brilliant. It was amazing.
John, I don't know about you, but I'm getting spoiled.
Is this your favorite show?
Well, I wasn't going to say that yet, but I was coming to it. I was just going to say, man, I'm getting spoiled having guys like this sitting a foot away from us, man.
Oh, well, Lord knows we need it. We've worn out our welcome, so thank you for.
Man, thanks for letting me be here, guys. I had a blast. And
well, we're at this point also to where we sit here and we talk about, we've got some of these world-class musicians. We need to get this guy involved significantly more regularly, because I was looking at this show when it comes out is going to be the 87th episode. We had Scott on back when we were in the teens, so we've gone.
That's
70.
Impossible.
Yeah,
it seems like it was like a few months ago.
It does.
Yeah, it's 70 some odd episodes, man. So we're not going to let it go that far again, man. We're going to have you on this show.
Man, you guys are consistent weekly.
We're going to come next time. We're going to talk about clothes, like what you should wear to a session.
Oh, I was thinking about
or what type of session. What should you wear? These are important, man. These are important.
I was thinking about closes, and we're going to close this thing down.
No, clothes.
Skinny
like
jeans
attire.
are like
you got to read the vibe of the session, man. Just like you're not going to bring a bop kit to a rock and roll session. What about your clothes?
Same with the attire, right?
Yeah.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for this week. Tune in every Monday. Hopefully, we're going to have this guy back on more often. New shows published every Monday. You can find us on iTunes, Google Play Podcast, Stitcher, Podbean, anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. Subscribe today. Go to our website, drummersweeklygroovecast.com. Yes, we were lucky enough to get a .com and not a .net. Visit us there. You can access all of our episodes there, our videos, our social media, which is still active. You can interact with us on Facebook or Twitter. We're at DW Groovecast, or also our fledgling Instagram. We're Drummers Weekly Groovecast at Instagram. So check us out there as well and follow us. Guys, it's been a blast. I don't know what else to say except we got to get out of here.
All right.
All
Scott,
right.
love you, brother.
Love you guys.
Love
Thanks.
you too, man.
Awesome
We'll see y'all
stuff.
next
All right.
Monday. Bye-bye.